Ambassador Vexthor of the Croylian Empire stood before the Galactic Council, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically. His species had dominated 3 sectors for millennia, and today would cement their supremacy. The humans, he announced with barely concealed contempt, claim they deserve a seat on this council. I propose we test their worthiness in the traditional manner, trial by champion. The council chamber erupted in chittering, humming, and various forms of alien discussion. The trial by champion was ancient, rarely invoked, but absolutely binding. Each species would send their finest warrior to compete in a series of challenges. The winner species would gain immense prestige and political power. Captain James Mitchell, humanity's representative, stood slowly. He was unremarkable by human standards, average height, brown hair showing gray at the temples, a slight build. The Croylian looked at him with something approaching pity. "We accept," Mitchell said simply. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "Excellent. The first challenge begins in 3 solar cycles. Choose your champion wisely, human." The Croylians are sending warlord Thrax, undefeated in 200 battles. As the council dispersed, Mitchell's aide, Lieutenant Rebecca Torres, leaned close. "Sir, Thrax killed his last opponent. The rules allow lethal force." "I know," Mitchell replied, his expression unreadable. "And we're sending Sergeant Marcus King, Marine Force Recon." Torres paled. "Sir, with respect, King is 45 years old. He's 3 decades past his physical prime. The other species are sending specimens in their absolute peak. The Croylians have biological enhancements. The Zinthari champion is basically a living tank. And we're sending a middle-aged man?" Mitchell smiled. "Rebecca, you're thinking about this wrong. Every other species is sending their strongest, their fastest, their most physically perfect specimen. They're thinking about muscles and claws and natural weapons. And we're not. Humans don't win because we're the strongest. We never have been. Every predator on Earth could kill us in a fair fight. But we never fought fair. We won because we're mean, we're stubborn, and we absolutely refuse to quit. King has survived 3 wars, counterinsurgency operations on 2 hostile worlds, and once walked 40 miles through a desert after his transport was shot down. He's not our strongest soldier, he's our meanest." 3 cycles later, the arena was packed with representatives from 200 species. The champions entered one by one, each more impressive than the last. Thrax stood 9 feet tall, covered in armor like scales, with arms that could crush steel. Then came Sergeant King. Scarred, lean, and utterly calm. He wore simple combat fatigues and carried nothing but a knife. The crowd murmured in confusion. Vexthor actually laughed. The announcer's voice boomed, "Let the trials begin." King looked up at Thrax, rolled his shoulders, and smiled. The arena floor was a nightmare of environmental hazards, a 50-kilometer course through simulated hostile terrain. Acid pools, gravitational anomalies, temperature extremes that would kill most species, and predatory drones programmed to attack. "This is a test of survival," the announcer explained. "First champion to reach the extraction point wins. Those who fail to complete the course within 12 hours are disqualified." 20 champions stood at the starting line. The Zinthari warrior was a massive crystalline entity, virtually indestructible. The Velkari champion had 6 legs and could run at incredible speeds. The Croylian Thrax simply radiated menace. And then there was King, checking his bootlaces. The signal fired. The champions exploded into motion, running, flying, leaping. King started at a steady jog. Within the first hour, 3 champions were eliminated by the predator drones. The Zinthari simply smashed through everything. Thrax used his superior strength to create paths through obstacles. The Velkari's speed let it dodge most hazards. King went around, under, or simply avoided the most dangerous sections entirely. When a predator drone locked onto him, he didn't fight it, he let it into an acid pool where it malfunctioned and died. By hour 6, half the champions had been eliminated. The Valkyrie, built for speed but not endurance, collapsed from exhaustion. Several others succumbed to environmental hazards they tried to brute force through. The observing aliens were confused. "Why is the human so slow?" one asked. Ambassador Mitchell, watching from the observation deck, replied, "He's not slow. He's pacing himself. This is about survival, not speed." Hour 8. Only 5 champions remained. Thrax was in the lead, using raw power to overcome obstacles. The Zinthri was close behind. King was in 4th place, maintaining the same steady pace he'd started with. Then the temperature dropped to lethal levels, a killing field designed to eliminate the weak. Champions were supposed to sprint through it, minimizing exposure. Thrax roared and charged ahead. The Zinthri, immune to temperature, walked through easily. King stopped. He pulled out his combat knife and began cutting into one of the fallen predator drones, extracting its power cell. Within minutes, he'd jury-rigged a heat source. He wrapped it in fabric torn from his uniform, creating makeshift insulation. Then he continued, warm and methodical. Hour 10. 3 champions remained, Thrax, the Zinthri, and King. The final obstacle was a canyon with gravity weapons that pulled objects toward the walls with crushing force. Thrax tried to muscle through. The Zinthri's density made it partially resistant. Both made it across, but exhausted. King studied the field for 10 minutes. Then he found a discarded piece of debris from earlier champions. He threw it into the field, watched how the gravity affected it, and calculated. He didn't fight the gravity, he used it, letting it pull him in a controlled arc from safe point to safe point. When he reached the extraction point, Thrax was there, barely conscious from exhaustion. The Zinthri stood motionless, its energy depleted. King jogged across the finish line looking like he'd just finished morning PT. "Trial 1 complete," the announcer said, shock evident even through the translation. Survivors: Warlord Thrax of Croylia, Guardian Zex of Zinther, and Sergeant King of Earth. In the observation deck, the alien representatives were silent. Vexthor's confidence had evaporated. He'd just watched a human outlast champions twice his size and strength through nothing but planning and endurance. Mitchell leaned back with satisfaction. "Gentlemen," he said to the aliens nearby, "you're beginning to understand." The second trial was more direct, a hunt. Each champion would pursue a KRWSS beast, one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, through a contained wilderness. The beast could camouflage itself, possessed razor-sharp claws, and had killed experienced hunters of a dozen species. The rules were simple: track it, kill it, return with proof. Time limit: 24 hours. 17 champions entered the wilderness. The previous trial had weeded out the weakest, but those who remained were formidable. Thrax carried a plasma lance. The Zinthri needed no weapons, it was a weapon. A new champion, Vress of the Talarian Dominion, had enhanced sensory organs that could track prey through solid rock. King carried his knife, a length of rope, and a small first aid kit. The champions dispersed into the artificial wilderness. Within hours, screams echoed through the forest. 3 champions found the KRWSS beast, or rather, it found them. Their broken bodies were discovered later, clawed beyond recognition. Vress used its enhanced senses to track the creature's thermal signature. It cornered the beast in a cave system and attacked. The fight was brutal, but Vress's superior technology won. It emerged 12 hours later, triumphant, carrying the beast's severed head. Thrax took a different approach. He burned sections of forest, trying to flush the creature out. The tactic worked. The KRWSS beast fled directly into his ambush. The battle was savage. Thrax's armor was shredded, but his plasma lance eventually brought the creature down. He returned after 18 hours, wounded but victorious. The Zinthari found a different KRWSS beast. The wilderness held several, and destroyed it through sheer physical superiority. 14 hours. King, meanwhile, seemed to be doing nothing. He'd found a stream and had been sitting beside it for 8 hours, motionless. What is he doing? Vexthor demanded. The human has made no attempt to hunt. Mitchell smiled. He's waiting. For what? For the animal to come to him. Vexthor scoffed. Ridiculous. The beast is a predator, not prey. But Mitchell was right. King had found the only water source in his section of wilderness. Every creature needed water. He'd studied the terrain, identified game trails, and positioned himself perfectly. He didn't need to chase the beast. Sooner or later, it would come to him. 20 hours passed. The KRWSS beast, wounded from evading other hunters, approached the stream cautiously. It was exhausted, dehydrated, and desperate. King remained absolutely still. His breathing was controlled. His scent was masked by mud he'd carefully applied. He'd been trained in techniques humanity had used for thousands of years, before they'd ever left Earth. The beast drank. King waited. Patience was a weapon other species had forgotten. Humans had once hunted mammoth by following them for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. They'd hunted prey by simply walking after it, never stopping, never relenting, until the animal died of fatigue. The beast finished drinking and turned to leave. That's when King moved. He didn't attack head-on, that would be suicide. Instead, he'd rigged a snare using his rope, positioned perfectly along the game trail. The beast's leg caught, and it stumbled. In that half-second of confusion, King struck. His knife found the exact spot where the creature's spinal column met its skull. One precise cut. The beast dropped instantly. King dragged the carcass back to the extraction point. He arrived at 23 hours, 50 minutes, cutting it close, but well within the time limit. The other champions stared. Vres had used advanced technology. Thrax had used overwhelming force. The Zinthari had used its physical superiority. King had used patience, planning, and a knife. Impossible, Vexthor whispered. He killed a KRWSS beast with primitive weapons. Mitchell's smile widened. Ambassador, humans have been apex predators on Earth for 300,000 years. We didn't get there by being strong. We got there by being smart, patient, and absolutely relentless. The third trial tested mental acuity and strategic thinking. Each champion was placed in a simulated war room and given command of identical forces, 100 units of mixed troops and vehicles. They would face off in bracket-style elimination matches. First to destroy the opponent's base would advance. The galaxy's best military minds had designed this test. It was meant to identify natural commanders, species with tactical superiority worthy of council membership. The first matches were spectacular. Thrax used overwhelming aggression, crushing his opponent with brute force tactics. The Zinthari employed perfect geometric formations, mathematically optimized for efficiency. Vres utilized ambush tactics enhanced by its species' superior sensory data. King drew the Talon champion, Commander HFY, a species famous for their military academies and strategic doctrine. The Talons had written half the texts on modern warfare. The match began. HFY deployed in textbook fashion, advanced scouts, main battle line, artillery support, and a mobile reserve. It was military perfection, the kind of formation taught in every war college across the galaxy. King's deployment made no sense. He scattered his forces randomly across the map. Units were positioned without apparent logic. His artillery was divided into small groups. His armor was spread thin. "What is the human doing?" asked a council member. Admiral Kresh of the Talon Confederacy, watching with interest, replied, "I don't know. That formation violates every principle of concentration of force." The battle began. HFY advanced methodically, expecting to encounter King's main line. Instead, he found nothing. Small units harassed his flanks. His scouts were picked off by hidden snipers. His supply lines were constantly under attack. HFY adjusted, trying to bring his superior force to bear. But every time he concentrated his troops to crush one of King's scattered units, 3 others would appear elsewhere, striking vulnerable targets. It was chaos. There was no front line, no clear objective, no conventional battle. King was fighting a guerrilla war, turning the simulation into a nightmare of asymmetric warfare. HFY, trained in conventional military doctrine, struggled to adapt. His forces were superior, his tactical knowledge greater, but he couldn't fight an enemy who refused to fight on his terms. 2 hours into the match, HFY's base fell to a small raiding party that had infiltrated through an underground tunnel system, a route the simulation designers had included as a theoretical option but never expected anyone to use. The alien observers were stunned. King had won with minimal casualties, despite facing a numerically equivalent force commanded by a superior conventional strategist. The next matches followed similar patterns. Against opponents who used overwhelming force, King dispersed and harassed. Against those who tried unconventional tactics, he suddenly shifted to rigid, conventional warfare, always fighting in the way his opponent was least prepared for. The semifinals arrived. King faced the Zinthri, whose crystalline thought processes could calculate thousands of tactical possibilities simultaneously. The match lasted 4 hours. The Zinthri's perfect mathematical warfare against King's chaotic, unpredictable human approach. In the end, King won by doing something no rational strategic calculation would predict. He sacrificed his entire army in a feint, leaving his base defended by only 3 units, which held long enough for a single infiltrator to destroy the Zinthri's command center. The finals, King vs Thrax. The Croylian had smashed through his bracket with pure aggression. Every opponent had been overwhelmed by his willingness to take casualties, to trade lives for victory. The match began. King immediately retreated. All his forces pulled back to defend his base. Thrax pursued, sensing weakness. He massed his entire army for a decisive assault. King waited until Thrax was fully committed, then triggered prepared demolitions that collapsed the only bridge across the canyon that separated their bases. Thrax's army was trapped on King's side with no retreat and no supply line. Then King counterattacked. Not against Thrax's army, against his undefended base. King's entire force had been positioned for this one move. While Thrax's troops starved and ran out of ammunition, King's units systematically destroyed the Croylian's infrastructure. Thrax roared in fury, but there was nothing he could do. His army was stranded, powerless to save his base. Victory, King! Vexthor sat in stunned silence. Mitchell leaned toward him and said quietly, "On Earth, we have a saying, amateurs study tactics. Professionals study logistics. Your champion focused on destroying the enemy. Mine focused on winning the war." The 4th trial caught everyone off guard. Instead of combat or physical challenges, the council announced a diplomatic scenario. Each champion would negotiate a peace treaty between 2 simulated hostile nations, with AI-controlled representatives playing the roles of warring factions. The goal: achieve a lasting peace agreement within a limited timeframe. Success would be judged on the stability and fairness of the resulting treaty. "This is absurd," Thrax protested. "We are warriors, not diplomats." The council was unmoved. Leadership requires more than strength. It requires the ability to forge alliances and end conflicts. The challenges began. Vress approached negotiations with cold logic, calculating optimal outcomes. The AI factions rejected the mathematical treaty as soulless and impractical. Failure. The Zinthari offered perfectly balanced terms, equitable to the mathematical decimal point. The AI factions argued over minor details and the negotiation collapsed into deadlock. Failure. Thrax attempted to intimidate both sides into agreement. The AI factions formed an alliance against him instead. Spectacular failure. Other champions tried various approaches, appeals to honor, economic incentives, cultural exchange programs. Most failed. A few achieved temporary agreements that the Council's analysis predicted would collapse within years. Then came King's turn. He sat down with the two AI representatives and listened. For the first hour, he barely spoke. He asked questions, learned their histories, understood their grievances. The AI factions, programmed with realistic emotional responses, were surprised. Previous champions had lectured, commanded, or calculated. King simply listened. Your people were displaced 50 years ago, he said to one faction. You've been fighting to return home ever since. And your people, he turned to the other, developed that land, invested resources, built communities. You can't just abandon it. Both AI representatives nodded warily. Here's the problem, King continued. You're both right. And you're both wrong. You're fighting over land, but what you really want is recognition. You, he pointed to the first faction, want acknowledgement that an injustice was done. You, he pointed to the second, want recognition of your legitimate development efforts. He pulled out a paper and began sketching. Shared governance. The disputed territory becomes autonomous, governed jointly by representatives from both groups. The original inhabitants get symbolic leadership roles acknowledging their historical claim. The developers get economic control, acknowledging their investment. Border regions get shared security forces. Mixed communities get cultural autonomy. That's not mathematically perfect, one AI objected. No, King agreed. It's messy. It requires both sides to compromise. But it's fair enough that both of you can accept it without feeling like you lost. Perfect solutions don't exist. Workable ones do. Over the next 3 hours, King negotiated details. He gave concessions to one side, then balanced it with concessions to the other. He acknowledged pain and anger on both sides. When negotiations stalled, he shared stories of Earth's conflicts, the peace processes that failed, and the ones that succeeded. My species has fought thousands of wars, he said. We've tried every possible approach to peace. Sometimes we failed. Sometimes we succeeded. What we learned is this: perfect justice is impossible. But enough justice to live together, that's achievable. The AI factions signed the treaty. The Council's analysis predicted 94% probability of lasting peace, the highest score of any champion. The alien observers were confused. How did he succeed where warriors and logicians failed? Mitchell stood before the Council. Because Sergeant King isn't just a soldier. He's a human. We've spent our entire history fighting each other, and learning to stop fighting. We've committed terrible atrocities and achieved miraculous reconciliations. We've destroyed each other and rebuilt together. Every human carries that history. He gestured to King, who sat quietly, looking exhausted. Your species sent warriors because you think strength wins. You sent logicians because you think calculation wins. We sent a man who's seen war, who's lost friends to violence, who knows the cost of conflict and the value of peace. You can't calculate your way to peace. You can't intimidate your way there. You have to want it enough to compromise, and you have to understand your enemy enough to find common ground. Vexthor said nothing, but his body language showed defeat. The Croylians had designed these trials to showcase strength. Instead, they were showcasing humanity's versatility. King looked up at Mitchell and gave a small shrug that said, "Just doing my job, sir." The fifth trial was announced, a test of creativity and innovation. The champions would face an unprecedented problem and would have to devise an original solution. Thrax growled. Vress's sensory organs drooped in concern. The Zinthari remained impassive. King just smiled slightly. Humans had been solving unprecedented problems since before they'd invented the wheel. The fifth trial was unlike anything expected. Each champion was sealed in a room with basic tools, raw materials, and a single objective: create something that had never existed before, something that would benefit multiple species across the galaxy. They had 12 hours. The test wasn't about physical prowess or strategic thinking, it was about raw creativity and innovation under pressure. Vress immediately began working on an advanced sensor array, combining principles from its species' technology with materials provided. The result was technically impressive but essentially an incremental improvement on existing technology. Innovative, but not revolutionary. The Zinthari approached the problem mathematically, calculating optimal molecular structures for new materials. It created a crystalline compound with impressive properties, stronger than existing materials, more heat-resistant. Valuable, certainly, but again, an iteration rather than a revolution. Thrax struggled. Croylian culture valued tradition and proven methods. Innovation was viewed with suspicion. He eventually built a more efficient weapon, which earned polite applause but clearly wasn't the breakthrough the council hoped for. Other champions produced various inventions: new alloys, modified engines, improved medical devices. All useful. None revolutionary. King sat for the first 2 hours doing nothing visible. He stared at the materials, occasionally picking something up, examining it, setting it down. The observers grew impatient. "What is he waiting for?" demanded a council member. Mitchell replied calmly, "He's thinking. The others are already working. The others are applying existing knowledge to new materials. King is trying to think differently." In the third hour, King began to work, but not on anything obvious. He started combining seemingly unrelated materials in strange ways. He was building something, but its purpose was unclear. By hour 6, the other champions had completed their inventions and were refining them. King was still assembling his mysterious device, which looked like a chaotic mess of components. Hour 9. King's device was taking shape, a cylindrical chamber with various inputs and outputs, connected to a strange lattice of crystalline structures surrounded by magnetic coils. Hour 11. He was making final adjustments, his face intense with concentration. Hour 12. Time expired. The judging began. Each champion presented their invention. The council was impressed by many submissions but hadn't seen the revolutionary breakthrough they'd hoped for. Then came King's turn. He stood before his device, which still looked more like a piece of abstract art than functional technology. "Honorable Council," he began, "every species here has faster-than-light travel. But every method requires enormous energy and expensive infrastructure. Jump gates, wormhole generators, hyperspace engines, all prohibitively expensive for smaller species or independent colonies." He activated his device. "This is a quantum entanglement bridge generator. It uses principles I borrowed from the Zinthari's crystalline structures, magnetic containment technology from Croylian engines, and sensor principles from Talarian science, but combined in a way none of those species thought to try." The device hummed. Strange readings appeared on monitors. This creates a stable wormhole connection between two linked devices, powered by ambient cosmic radiation. No massive energy requirements. No expensive fuel. Once two communities have these paired devices, they have permanent, instant communication and transportation. Total construction cost, about 1/10 of a basic jump gate. The council chamber fell silent. Then erupted in chaos. "Impossible," someone shouted. "The energy requirements are handled by using quantum entanglement to borrow energy from the future connection and pay it back through the past connection," King explained. It's a closed-time loop. The math works, I can show you. A Xinthari scientist rushed forward to examine the device. After several minutes, its crystalline structure flashed in what King had learned was excitement. The principles are sound. This could work. This would revolutionize galactic civilization. Vexthor stood, trembling. You created this in 12 hours? From random materials? No, sir, King replied. Humanity created this over thousands of years. Every scientist, every engineer, every person who looked at a problem and thought, there must be a better way. I just stood on their shoulders and combined knowledge from species who never thought to share ideas. Humans have always been good at that, taking things that exist and combining them in new ways. We call it thinking outside the box. Mitchell addressed the council. This is what humans bring to the galaxy. Not superior strength or technology, we're actually pretty average at both. What we bring is perspective. We're newcomers, so we see connections others miss. We don't have centuries of traditional thinking holding us back. We look at your technologies and think, what if we mixed this with that? We innovate not because we're smarter, but because we think differently. The council conferred. The vote was unanimous. King's invention won the trial by an overwhelming margin. As they prepared for the 6th trial, Vexthor approached Mitchell privately. Ambassador, I begin to understand why humanity concerns us. You're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. But you're adaptable. Unpredictable. You see opportunities others miss. We're survivors, Mitchell replied. We evolved on a death world where everything was trying to kill us. We survived by being clever, adaptable, and just stubborn enough to refuse to quit. Those traits tend to serve us well. Vexthor's expression was unreadable. One trial remains. And I suspect it will be the most revealing of all. The 6th and final trial was announced, a test of pure survival. Each champion would be stranded alone on a hostile moon, no tools, no weapons, no supplies. They had to survive for 5 days while the environment tried to kill them. The moon was a nightmare, acidic rain, toxic atmosphere requiring constant filter mask replacement from naturally occurring materials, predators, extreme temperature swings, and terrain designed to be lethal. Most species would die within hours. The champions were dropped in different locations. Thrax immediately began hunting for shelter, using his natural armor to survive the initial acid rain. Vres's enhanced senses helped it identify toxic plants to avoid. The Xinthari was largely immune to environmental hazards but still needed energy sources. King landed in a rocky ravine. The first thing he did was take stock. No tools, hostile environment, 5 days. He'd been in worse situations, though not by much. During his second tour, he'd survived behind enemy lines for 3 weeks eating insects and drinking from contaminated puddles. Day 1. King found a cave, not for shelter, but to mine specific minerals he'd spotted. Using rocks as tools, he created a crude filter system for the atmosphere. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep him alive. He built a simple water collection system using hollowed stones to gather and purify acid rain. Then he found edible fungus growing in dark crevices and cached it. Other champions struggled. 2 had already been evacuated after environmental exposure. Thrax was burning through his energy reserves fighting the environment. The Xinthari had found a power source but was isolated in a crater. Day 2. King expanded his camp. He'd woven plant fibers into cordage. He'd chipped stone into basic tools. He'd created a primitive calendar by marking stone. He was essentially recreating 10,000 years of human technological development in fast forward. The observers were fascinated. He's building civilization from nothing, one noted. That's what humans do, Mitchell replied. Drop us anywhere, we'll adapt. Leave us alone, we'll thrive. Humans went from caves to space stations. We know how to start from zero. Day 3. King had fire, created by focusing sunlight through a piece of crystalline rock he'd polished. He'd trapped a small creature for food. He'd improved his shelter. He wasn't just surviving, he was comfortable. Thrax was barely holding on, using meditation techniques to conserve energy. Vress was doing better but had suffered toxic exposure. The Zinthri remained stable. Day 4. A massive storm hit, the moon's most violent weather pattern. It would have killed the champions in the open. Thrax found a crevice and wedged himself in. The Zinthri went dormant to conserve power. Vress used its technology, created during the innovation trial, to barely survive. King had predicted the storm. He'd observed atmospheric patterns and recognized the warning signs. His shelter was reinforced. He had food cached. He had water stored. He settled in to wait it out, using the time to sharpen his stone tools. The storm raged for 18 hours. When it cleared, 3 more champions had been evacuated. Only 4 remained: Thrax, the Zinthri, Vress, and King. Day 5. The final test. A rescue shuttle would arrive at a specific location, requiring a 10-kilometer journey across the most hostile terrain. The first champion to reach it would win. Thrax burst from his shelter, using his remaining energy in one desperate sprint. The Zinthri calculated the optimal route and began moving. Vress used its sensors to navigate hazards. King packed his crude tools, filled a makeshift water container, and started walking at a steady pace. He wasn't the fastest. But he'd survive the journey. Halfway to the extraction point, Thrax collapsed. He'd pushed too hard, burned out too quickly. Evacuation team retrieved him. The Zinthri was slowing, its power reserves nearly depleted. Vress was making good time but had sustained injuries from toxic exposure. King just kept walking. Steady. Methodical. Unstoppable. When he encountered obstacles, he went around them. When he faced dangers, he avoided them. He didn't try to be fast or strong. He just refused to stop. The Zinthri reached the extraction point first, but its power failed. It stood motionless, unable to board the shuttle without assistance. Vress arrived second, but collapsed from toxic shock. Medical teams rushed to help. King arrived third. He walked up to the shuttle, nodded to the pilot, and climbed aboard. He wasn't the fastest. But he was the only champion who reached extraction under his own power, still capable of continuing if necessary. The trials concluded. The council convened for final judgment. The results are unprecedented, the council leader announced. Sergeant Marcus King of Earth has won 4 trials, placed highly in the others, and demonstrated capabilities we've never seen combined in a single individual. Vexthor stood, his 4 arms hanging in a gesture of respect. I challenged humanity believing them weak. I was wrong. They are not the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced. But they are perhaps the most dangerous species I have encountered. Dangerous? Mitchell asked. Yes. Because you refuse to lose. You adapt. You innovate. You survive. You turn every disadvantage into an advantage. You don't fight fair, you fight to win. And most terrifying of all. Vexthor looked directly at King, you never, ever give up. The council leader nodded. Humanity has earned its seat on this council. But more than that, they have taught us something valuable. That strength comes in many forms. That survival isn't about physical power but adaptability, creativity, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. King stood and saluted. Sir, permission to speak? Granted. I didn't do anything special. I just did what any human would do, I assessed the situation, used what I had, and kept going. That's not exceptional for humans. That's just, us. Mitchell smiled. And that, counselors, is why you should be careful about challenging humans. We might not be the biggest, strongest, or most advanced species. But we're the species that turned a death world into a garden. We're the species that looked at every impossible problem and said, "Watch this." We're the species that simply refuses to accept defeat. We're humans. And we're just getting started. The council erupted in various forms of applause. Humanity had earned its place, not through force, but by proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't the biggest predator. It's the one who refuses to be prey.